Question. My own projection was so enjoyable, but more importantly, contained so many potentials that I wonder why Western man isn't more aware of these abilities. Why doesn't he cultivate them and put them to use? Answer. Western man has chosen to focus his energy outward and largely ignore inner realities. The social and cultural aspects, and even the religious ones, automatically inhibit such experiences from childhood on. There is no social benefit at all connected with projections in your society, and many taboos against it. This is, of course, chosen by those involved in that civilization. There are also balances that exist before moderation and understanding are reached. Some personalities choose to be reincarnated in exteriorly oriented societies, in compensation for lives that were lived with great concentration inward and very poor physical manipulation. Man learns, you see, that inner reality and outer reality must both be understood and used constructively. Projections occur, of course, in the sleep state constantly, whether or not they are remembered. They are recalled when there is some reason to do so, some merit or obvious achievement involved, as in societies where it is considered highly advantageous to use dreams and projections. If you are presently experiencing a life in which you have chosen high emphasis upon physical locomotion, for example, then through vague dream memories of flying, you can be inspired towards, say, the invention of airplanes or rockets. But if you actually understood the fact that your own consciousness can indeed travel outside of the body, then the impetus toward physical development and locomotion is not nearly so intense. Question. In the 429th session for August 14, 1968, you said that some personalities can be a part of more than one entity. Answer. I have mentioned this many times. There are no boundaries to the self, and no barriers upon its development. A personality may, quote-unquote, originally be a part of a given entity, and on its own develop interests quite different. It can on its own take a lonely way, or it can instead attach itself or gravitate toward other entities with interests like its own. The original connection will not be severed, but new ones made and formed. Question. In Chapter 19 of the Seth material, you gave a list of inner senses. Are there more of these that you haven't told us about? There are indeed. They have to do, however, with experiences that you will not normally encounter in your particular system, that lie latent. Almost any cell has the capacity for growing into any given organ, or forming any part of the body. It has the capacity for developing sense organs that, practically speaking, will not be developed if the cell becomes an elbow or a knee, but the capacity is there. This applies not only to your own species, but in many cases between species, and there are basic units in living matter capable of forming animal or vegetable life, capable of developing the perceptive mechanisms inherent in any of these. It is therefore theoretically possible for you to see the world through a frog's eye, or a bird's, or an ant's. We are speaking here of physical senses. The inner self has also latent inner senses besides the ones that it normally uses while the consciousness is tuned into a particular camouflage system. Some, however, are inexpressible in physical terms, and only analogies could be used to hint of their nature. In this book there is no need to discuss them. They belong in a book given more specifically to interior methods of perception. Question. If you hadn't been able to speak through Jane, would you try to do it through another? Or are you doing so anyhow? Answer. I have spoken through others. The arrangements this time were already made, you see. It is true that Rupert need not have accepted the arrangement. If so, the material would have been given, but in a different fashion. I would not have spoken in this way, for this work requires a certain specific rapport and definite characteristics on the part of the personality involved. Material could have been given in a much more simple fashion through another, but I wanted it as undistorted and fully dimensional as possible. Had Rupert not been available, the material would have been given to a speaker, living in your terms, who was also involved in the creative field. There is no one else presently alive in your system with whom I felt any great rapport in the past, except yourselves. Such a speaker would have received the information largely in the dream state, and written it in a series of both treatises and fictional narrative. Had Rupert not accepted, however, it is most possible that he would have chosen another life in which to fulfill the task, in which case I would have waited. The decision was always his, however, and had he not accepted at all, other arrangements would have been made. Now, you early foresaw your part in these sessions, and our work. One of the paintings you did many years ago clearly foreshadowed the development of your psychic endeavors. This was the one you sold, of the man that hung for some time in the position in which my portrait now hangs. That was a portrait of Joseph, in other words, of your own inner identity as you intuitively perceived it at the time. You were not consciously aware of the connection, but you were consciously aware of the painting's strong impact. It represented also the searching, creatively dissatisfied portion of you looking for further understanding and knowledge. The peculiar relationship existing between you and Rupert was also a prerequisite, and so your permission and acceptance was also needed. Had you remained apart, the sessions would not have begun. You have been connected with the same entity, though you have sprung apart from it, but the inner relationship adds to the power available. You help steady the circuit, so to speak. You also generated initial energy and impetus to help Rupert's own. Such work does not only necessitate the choosing of one individual, but is also an endeavor in which many other elements are taken into consideration. It was known, for example, that Rupert would need your support, as it is also known that the work itself would help your own creative abilities. All of this was decided by you both and by me before you began this particular lifetime. Even Rupert's intellectual questioning and often deep reluctance was known in advance and adapted to aid in the work involved. The information was not to be given to quote-unquote born believers, but to intelligent people and to a quote-unquote medium who often questioned it, not only for himself, but for all of those given to the same kind of questioning. As Rupert grows to understand, therefore, and as he continues to develop, he triumphs not only for himself, but for all those who follow his ventures. And yet he wanted a balance also, and so you stand as a man who intuitively recognized the value of inner transformation and the importance of the material, even though you were unacquainted with such ideas. It goes without saying that on much deeper levels there is no reluctance on Rupert's part, or the abilities would not have developed in this fashion. His criticism in the beginning served also as a reassurance to the ego, in its first experiences, that it would not be shoved aside or damaged in any fashion. The characteristics needed for quote-unquote mediumship are much like those needed for any strong creative person. A strong supportive ego is a necessity, particularly in initial stages. In periods of severe personality disturbances that can occur simultaneously with great creativity, the ego becomes terrified of the strength of the creative ability, fearing that it can be crushed underneath. In such cases, the ego is too rigid and does not expand with the nature of the personality's whole creative experience. Of course, this could happen with mediumship, as with any other such activity. In this case, however, Rupert's ego gradually began to let its rigidity go, in a gradual process that allowed the whole personality, itself included, to expand.